be the first to say there have been plenty of things that haven't worked. The Agile Brand has been very successful. I've actually launched a couple other podcasts since then, but I launched another show a few years back that I did a few episodes. It just wasn't working and I dropped it. And that's one of the things that I've learned as well, is to be okay with quitting, failing. These are all like bad words, and we're all kind of taught that they're bad words, but I think it's how you fail and how you quit and what you do after you fail and you quit, right? So it's like, I look at failure as an opportunity to learn. I've learned much more by failing than I have by succeeding.
Have you ever noticed that some of the best ideas come from unexpected places? Your next breakthrough may come from a leader facing similar challenges, but in a completely different sector. Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop. Join us as we explore how today's successful leaders inspire, influence, and connect with others. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board, who have teamed up to spotlight how great leaders and communicators are making their impact in the world. This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs, ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. As a proud GW graduate myself, I can attest that faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. Today, my guest on Chief Influencer is Greg Kihlström. He is a best-selling author, speaker, and entrepreneur, and serves as an advisor and consultant to top companies on marketing technology, marketing operations, customer experience, and digital transformation initiatives. Here are 3 things that you should know about Greg. First, he's a multiple-time co-founder and C-level leader who knows how to build and sell successful businesses. Number 2, he now shares his business acumen through best-selling books and a top-rated podcast. His most recent book, Priority is Action, is a guide to help people make better decisions and follow through on them. His award-winning podcast, The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlström, now in its 6th year with over 450 episodes and 2 million downloads, discusses brand strategy, marketing, and customer experience with some of the world's leading experts and leaders. It is an awesome podcast that you have to check out. And number 3, in addition to being a teacher, Greg is a lifelong learner. In fact, he is currently a doctoral candidate for a DBA in business intelligence. Greg has received a ton of accolades, and I am excited that today we add Chief Influencer to that list. Greg, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much. Looking forward to the conversation.
Well, it's always, even more special to interview somebody who is a super pro podcaster, and you have hundreds of episodes, and I'm just really, inspired by how you have taken all your expertise working with clients and turned that into becoming, a thought leader and expert that so many people turn to. And I'd love to just kind of start by going back a little bit. And I just wonder, could you start by telling us, what do you wish that you knew when you were starting your very first company? Now that you know, having built businesses and providing advice to, so many leaders in the marketing space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, lots of things, I guess, is the short answer. But, I started my first company when I was, early 20s, 23, 24, probably. So knew nothing about business, knew nothing about, HR, operations, finance, all of this. I was a web designer, and I just thought it's I think they call it the entrepreneur's fallacy is, I started a business thinking that it would allow me to do only what I loved all day long, and, everything would be great. And it ended up being, I got to do that a little bit, but then I also had to learn many, many other things, including the things that I just mentioned. So yeah, I think I wish I would have known a little bit more about, balancing the books, or, just a little of what I was getting myself into, even understanding sales. I understood marketing because I have some of that in my background as well. But, just a better understanding of, oh, wow, this is what it takes to actually keep the lights on in a business. And, we started very small, but, quickly enough grew with employees, and that came with its own challenges, lots of opportunities too. But but lots of challenges. So yeah, a little bit of context, maybe a little bit longer in the world of work before I ventured out on my own. But as I'm sure we'll talk about more today, I learned by doing, and I learned by doing the wrong thing more than I learned by doing the right thing. And so, no regrets.
It kind of reminds, there's that, story in business of like the baker who loves baking, and then the more successful the bakery becomes, the less baking they get to do because they have to figure out how to scale that business. And that's probably a similar challenge for a lot of marketers, even when they're not entrepreneurs, right? Is the more successful you become in marketing and you work at a larger scale, you have to figure out how not just to do that one cool thing, but how do you scale that solution much broader? And that's a whole different set of challenges, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that challenge ended up teaching me that I liked a whole set of things that I didn't even know existed, back in my early 20s, but B, that I never even thought that I was the kind of person that would like to think about systems and processes and, operationalizing and scaling and all of those things now that come in really handy in my work with very large organizations. But as a small growing, digital marketing agency, you know, with turnover and client turnover, employee turnover, all of those things, as well as growing pretty quickly at various times, we were just forced to learn how to do things in a repeatable way and figure out, in some cases, how to do things for the very first time. I mean, started the company in 2003, and all of a sudden we had clients that wanted us to do social media marketing for them when that wasn't really a thing. When we started the company, like it was just kind of like YouTube started the year we started. So it's like,
Wow.
it was really interesting to, be not ever really the first, but be on the early edge of a lot of the things coming down. And it's kind of inventing processes as we go. Because to your point, we just had to, we were small enough that we had to be scrappy and be able to repeat things. But our clients expected us to, be in the same league as much larger companies.
Well, and maybe it's not the first in the world, but it's the first sometimes for the industry, or it's the first for them, if nothing
Yeah.
else, right? And
Yeah.
so that brings a whole set of, and that is kind of how the landscape has maybe evolved a little bit. Is it's not at the first anymore. Sometimes it's figuring out how to scale something. So maybe that's a good kind of place for me to say, okay, fast forward to where Greg is now, and you're speaking. You have ton of books, more on the way. And you have, hundreds of episodes of this podcast. So who are you trying to influence now through your message and the content that you're producing? Who's your target audience?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm reaching out to what enterprise organization leaders and what I call aspiring leaders. So, those that there's kind of the practitioner level that, there are some areas where I know a lot and I have a depth of knowledge, but I think when it comes to leading and management, that's an area where I think I have a lot to offer, because I've not only been a doer and roll up my sleeves. Even now, I work alongside teams and often do a lot of work, as opposed to just kind of, not to denigrate coaches, but a lot of time a coach is kind of a helping and giving some advice, but I'm doing less coaching and I'm doing a lot more hands-on kind of work and advice and things like that. And so I'm really reaching out to those leaders that need some advice of, they aren't rolling up their sleeves and they have to manage, and they often have to manage very large teams and very large budgets. And so they don't have the time to learn how to use a platform or what the latest trend in XYZ is. And so a lot of what I do is to give them the, hands-on advice and just kind of thinking a few steps ahead kind of advice of, here's what you need to be thinking about. Here's what you as a leader need to know about this. You don't need to know everything, but here's what you do need to know, because I've always found, as a manager, as a leader in my own organizations, I do a much better job leading if I actually, if I did the job myself, hands-on, but that's not always possible. But I need to know what the actual roles that the people that are reporting to me are doing in order to really effectively manage them. And so that's really my focus, is to try to give that kind of advice. And it's in a relatively narrow space of marketing technology and customer experience and really digital transformation along those lines.
So when you had your agency, you may have worked in some cases with, a nonprofit that had a really small marketing team. And now you're working with, some of the largest enterprises in the world, and you're working with these enterprise marketers, which you mentioned is kind of your sweet spot in your audience. What do we need to know about the difference between enterprise marketers and just marketers?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a smaller organization, an individual has to do a lot more, let's say, diverse tasks, right? So, you may be a VP or even a CMO at one of those organizations, but chances are you're pretty hands-on doing stuff. If you have a team of 10 people or less, and you're a CMO, you're doing a lot of marketing work yourself. If you have a team of 300 to 1,000 people on your marketing team, you're doing a lot of management, a lot of strategy. Maybe you're writing some PowerPoints and all that kind of stuff. But it is really important that you understand how, the different types of work that are being done, but you're thinking at a different level, and you're relying on a lot of, managers sitting right below you. They could be VPs, they could be directors, whatever, but you're relying on a lot of those people to oversee the direct work. And so it's a different way of thinking. And it's kind of more systems thinking than it is really knowing even specifically about marketing in some cases. And so, so I've learned to speak to both of those levels of both, again, I have to know how the marketing work is done, but I also have to know how organizations function and how the politics within an organization works and how employees, get okay with the idea of change, because I think that's one of the biggest things happening right now, regardless of, I deal a lot in the marketing space, but regardless of what kind of function you work in, change is really all that's happening right now, other than the day-to-day kind of serving customers. It's like everyone is going through some kind of transformation of systems and platforms and data and AI and all of that stuff.
I guess I'm wondering, in that environment, it sounds like a marketing leader could figure out a great solution that's going to work for them or for their enterprise. But if they can't manage the internal complexities or the politics or the other stakeholders, they may not be able to get their solution through, right? And so I wonder if you could just talk more about that. I don't know if you have any, tips or examples about that, but it seems like such an essential skill. You wouldn't think a marketing leader would necessarily have to, is that in the job description, I guess? But if you can't do it, then it doesn't matter if you have the best answer in the world. It's not going to be able to get implemented.
Yeah, I mean, so two things there. I mean, one, just the statistics are, I would call them abysmal. So, digital transformations, I think, have maybe a 30% success rate, and that's kind of rounding up.
Wow.
So we're talking about 70% of these large scale initiatives are failing to hit their. It's not that they all like completely fail and never complete, but 70% are not hitting their primary objectives and things like that. And so, the way I look at it and the way I encourage others to look at it is to split it into pieces. That's always, it's always easier to kind of look at it in different elements. So people, process, platforms. So, what usually happens is a lot of dollars get spent on a platform, and there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of attention, and a lot of hope pinned on a platform to save the company or save the team or save the initiative. What ends up happening usually is it's the people and the processes that end up killing the project if it doesn't succeed, because again, it's not even through malintent or lack of goodwill or lack of wanting to do a good job, but people don't love change. We're just, that's not something that we like in general. But So getting people to be okay with change, getting people to be okay with changing a process that maybe they've been doing for 5, 10, sometimes more years if they've been in an organization, making all of that stuff line up with a new platform, it's not easy. And again, the numbers suggest that as well. And so how you get it to be to work better is to do it in smaller pieces, do it more I'm a huge proponent of agile and smaller sprints and smaller initiatives to like get towards a goal. But it also works, and it's realistic, because we cannot know what the world's gonna be like 3 years from now, but we can have a pretty good idea of what it's going to be like 3 months from now. And so let's get to 3 months, let's get to 6 months, so on and so forth. And people are going to be more okay, because they're going to have helped and been part of achieving something. And when you make them part of the process, instead of saying, hey, your job is changing, we'll tell you when it changed, we'll get back to you in 12 months when something's done, that's just a recipe for disaster.
Do you think it is harder or easier or different in today's kind of hybrid virtual world to get the right people to come together to address change? How has change changed since over your career, but particularly over the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, I always in my career, before I sold my agency and kind of became independent, that was about 6 years ago. So, pre-pandemic, but I always, my agency, everybody came into the office. I mean, the only time we didn't work in the office was when there was a snow day, and then everyone was disappointed because we could technically work remote. And I feel terrible now sometimes, but like, we made everyone work even when it was snowing because we could work remotely. But anyway, that said, I've been working with, this is one of the things that is kind of interesting to me. I've been working with, multinationals and, very large organizations that are pretty spread out geographically, even if they're, in the US with several offices. I've been working with them for quite a while now. And so this idea of, hybrid work, and, I was already doing that pre-pandemic with, there's plenty of clients that I never met before the pandemic. I still haven't met in person, post-pandemic. I think there are benefits to being together and, that kind of in-person interaction. But I also, I'm a huge proponent of remote work. I work from home almost all the time, unless I'm at a conference or once in a while a client visit or something like that. But so, personally, I don't think it should really be a barrier. I think some people, I'm also an introvert, so maybe that's part of it too. If I were more an extrovert, then there might be some energy that I'm not getting from those interactions as well. So, some of it is subjective from my perspective, but I don't think that working remote and working hybrid should be an excuse for lack of creativity. And, I think there's been studies that show, numbers can show you what you want them to show. There's been studies both ways. There's been some lack of innovation. Some, it's really the amount of innovation that happens at the coffee maker or the water cooler, if they still have water coolers. It's overblown as far as what a detriment it is to not have that, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can't necessarily think of any groundbreaking ideas that came up around the Nespresso machine, maybe is the new water cooler. So, and folks still do intentional offsites, but marketing technology has, has created some really great platforms to keep people in touch in ways they couldn't be before. So,
yeah. Well, and to your point, I think focused efforts are like an offsite, like a focused effort to actually, our purpose here is to brainstorm and come up with good ideas. Yeah. I can see the benefit of doing that in person. There are some things that are missed when you're on Zoom, and there's always that one or two people in a big meeting that you just know they're working on something else, even though they're technically looking at the screen or whatever. But like, I won't say that was never me, but something is missed in some cases. But I think you also gain so much by having more time at home, or with your partners, your kids, your whatever. Like, there's a lot of things that I think we all kind of realized we were missing during when we had the pandemic. Lots of terrible things happened, and not to make it into a good thing all of a sudden or anything, but I think we started to realize when we were at home so much, work is work. Like there's so we can get work done, but also kind of have a little bit of a life, or a little bit more of a life, and still get the work done. So I think I try to make good out of terrible things when possible, and so I think that is one good thing that came out of that.
Yeah. I want to ask, so Greg, I've obviously known you for a long time, since you were in your previous life of having a successful agency, and just you always were very well respected and had a great reputation. And I've seen many business folks who've tried to have another chapter and maybe tried to write a book, try to launch a podcast, with a lot of those efforts obviously not getting far off the ground. You've been so successful in doing that, at least looking from the outside, seeing, multiple books and bestsellers and a podcast that has millions of downloads. And so I'd love to just ask if you could talk to us a bit about how you have broken through, how you have sort of, really you're a chief influencer. That's why you're here today, and how you've been able to do that in a really fragmented and noisy world. And what you've learned along the way, particularly, there's probably some things behind the scenes that we can't see, lessons that you've learned as you've built up your own personal brand, but you've built up the Agile brand of books and podcasts. So what can you tell us? We are all ears.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, first of all, you've mentioned the things that worked. So there's plenty of things that didn't work. Is the first one, and I'll be the first to say there have been plenty of things that haven't worked. The Agile brand has been very successful. I've actually launched a couple other podcasts since then, but I launched another show a few years back that I did a few episodes. It just wasn't working, and I dropped it. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned as well, is to be okay with quitting, failing. These are all like bad words, and we're all kind of taught that they're bad words, but I think it's how you fail and how you quit and what you do after you fail and you quit, right? So it's like, I look at failure as an opportunity to learn. I've learned much more by failing than I have by succeeding, and I think a lot of people do that as well. And I would say a lot of people that have been much more successful than me, maybe in their first chapter of their career. I've seen a lot of them. Only what I can say, I only know what I see from the outside, of course, but it seems like there's a level of comfort that's kind of achieved when you get to a certain place. And I've always strived, and I can't say I've been 100% successful in this, but I've always strived to not take anything for granted, and to always try to approach things with a bit of humility and a bit of like, I don't know what I'm doing like day to day, and to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to learn something from this. I mean, to use an example from way back, I never did public speaking until I think like 2011 or something like that. I was terrified of getting up in front of people. Just could barely, like, the first time I was on a panel. It was the very first time. It was an event in DC. Someone was kind enough to like put me on that panel. I don't even know what I said on, like, I think I blacked out during it. I was so nervous, and I think I said some stupid stuff, but you know what? I got out of there. I had some great support. My team from the agency was there. They like clapped and like were super nice, and probably, lying through their teeth when they said I did a good job, but like, God bless them. But, I was uncomfortable, but I started getting more and more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that's what I've learned most about anything, is if I feel a little bit uncomfortable, I should do it more, and I should do it again until I'm, more comfortable with it, until I feel better. I think there's a difference between being uncomfortable and just feeling like something is just the wrong fit and I just hate it, and it's sending me off in a direction that I don't want to be in. So I think understanding the difference between those two things I'm getting really good at that, I would say. But yeah, when I find something where I'm like, oh, I don't know, that might be a little weird, or I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. Like, that's the sure sign that I must try it once. So yeah.
I think that's such a great takeaway because, sometimes we get that like "Ugh," feeling, and that feeling, is it saying, don't do this? Or is it saying like, do this, and it
Right,
sounds like
right.
that kind of, you've discerned that feeling of discomfort. And I love what you said, you'll get comfortable being uncomfortable. What a great thing for us to all take back, because it doesn't matter what you do. I mean, that's just something that you can really internalize.
Yeah, 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 definitely. Yeah, and it's another one of my learnings. I mean, I did after I sold the agency, I did a couple startups. One of them I exited. The other, I learned we ended up doing a small acquisition, or got acquired from it, but I learned that I actually don't like being a CEO of a tech company. I thought I would be great at it, and like I had this amazing idea and blah blah blah, and I had an amazing team helping me with it. But looking back on it, I've learned to really be comfortable that I'm really good at helping other people like make their ideas better and achieve something bigger as part of a team. And I may be a leader as part of that team. I may be a key part of that team, but my role isn't to be a great inventor or a great, again, CEO probably ever again. I never say never, I guess, but I've kind of found where I'm good at helping to consult and make
Mm.
existing things better, or make new ideas happen. And that's it. It took a little bit. That was a tough thing to realize, because I kind of had this picture of myself as something else. But once I kind of embraced that, I'm so much happier.
Yeah. You mentioned kind of that role that you like to play now, helping people get better and the learning. And I mean, you must be learning obviously so much about technology. You are already a technologist and an expert. I think all leaders need to understand how new technology is going to impact them and their businesses. And this is a real sweet spot for you. So I was wondering what lessons you can share that you've learned recently about how leaders can see new innovations that are coming and how they, are experiencing them, and how they should adapt to them. In particular, obviously, artificial intelligence is one that we're talking a lot about. So,
Yeah.
what's kind of on your mind in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're well past the point where anyone, particularly leaders, can say, well, I'm not a technologist, or I'm not an engineer, or you don't need to learn how to write code. In fact, probably a few years from now, no one but a handful of people need to know how to write code. But um you have to understand technology if you're going to be a leader in an organization. I don't care what part of the organization you're in. Again, I'm very focused in the marketing realm, which has a lot of relationship to technology. But just to talk about AI in particular, like you've got to try out. Like if you haven't used ChatGPT by now, like first of all,
That's
where
like
have you
criminal, right?
been?
If you haven't even tested it, that's a problem.
Yeah, yeah, but it's like if you don't understand the difference between this tool and that tool, like you don't have to use them all, but like you should understand. I mean, one stat I saw, I wrote an article for Forbes about this even, but something like a large percentage of employees, more than 30%, are using these tools, these generative AI tools, without telling their bosses that they're using them. Okay, so that's a huge problem on many levels. I mean, if you're in a highly regulated industry, there's huge like compliance and legal issues there. But even in any company anywhere, if you're an employee using those things and afraid to tell your bosses that you're using them, there's some real gaps in understanding and expectations that need to be solved. And from the leader perspective, you need to understand when, where, and how these tools can be used, when they're terrible to use, and a real person should do all of the work instead. You just need to understand this stuff and not just say, oh, well, the kids will figure this out and they'll bring us some ideas or whatever. No, you as a leader need to understand this stuff. Again, you don't have to use every single thing that comes out, but you need to set some guardrails, and the rule can't be no. That, because we're already past that. We passed that a year ago at least, to just flat out ban the tools. At this point, you need to be able to have some kind of perspective, and it's okay to say no here, here, and here. There just has to be a yes somewhere.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people are going to leave. They're going to, because employees of all kinds, like, they want to use these tools. It's the future of work, and to simply ban them is just, it actually doesn't make sense. It's counterproductive. But to understand how to use them, I think that's part of the role of a leader.
It's funny. Years ago, you probably remember this, a lot of corporations like banks banned their employees from using social media.
Yeah.
The same way that some companies are banning the use of AI. And now when you fast forward, those companies are hiring people to train their employees how to use social media for their jobs. And so it went from a no to like, actually, we're going to pay because we want you to do this. And of course, all of those employees are behind, and the culture is behind because everybody was so scared of it and told they couldn't do it that, they've not begun to flex those muscles. And so I'm sort of interested to see how that happens with AI, because, now we're seeing AI just built into so many things that the thought that you would ban all AI is, a bit laughable, because, you have to say, well, what does that mean, since it's integrated in Zoom, so,
well, right. And, the companies that I work with now, they're, at the scale that a lot of them are working at, there definitely are some, there's, for any company, there's some ethical and legal and sometimes compliance issues, but the industry has caught up really quickly in building tools that don't send your data out to the web at large, and keep your company's data private. And it's like there are plenty of solutions out there to do that. I think it's more now about what can you do, like what would make the most sense to do. And even whether you're very small or huge organization, I think it's also about prioritizing what you do and when. What are the things that automating would really, really help? Where are the most human errors already? Let's automate that stuff. Banks have been using fraud protection for years that is automated. That's AI. So it's not like we've been AI has existed for decades. So that's the other thing, is that it sometimes feels like AI was invented last year or something, but it's been around, as long as computers were machines and not people. The AI has existed in some form. And so, but I think it really comes down to, first, for those that are a little bit newer as an organization to this, or as a leader to this, it's like, okay, find some use cases and kind of bring everybody along for the ride with you, and learn together. And you're gonna mess some stuff up, so make those first use cases like low stakes, but do it. If you haven't already, start doing it, and do it formally as an organization, not just ad hoc, and where you don't know what this person in the corner is doing and where their data is going and all that stuff.
What are some of the ways that you use AI and automation?
Yeah, I use it a lot. I have several tools that I work with depending on, what I need to do. For my podcast, I've got automated, transcripts generated, and social posts and clips and all those kinds of things. I'm always playing with things like that, just to make, for the show, I have a very small team. I have a team that, does production on it, but I do a lot of the promotion myself. So anything that can automate that, even the process of booking guests and all that, is highly automated. And I've got, from a writing perspective, I've never published anything that is like straight out of GPT or something like that, but I use it a lot to help, whether it's to give me ideas or to improve something a little bit that I've started, or stuff like that. And I have like 3 or 4 different writing tools that I'll use, and I have kind of a sense of like what's going to get me the best results for what type of effort. Some things are a little bit better at longer form versus shorter form versus brainstorming and all or like reading stuff from the web versus, it's a large language model that's already, kind of crawled the web as of years ago or something like that. So, just kind of understanding that, just kind of always, always playing with stuff. And anytime that I do something once, this comes from my days at the agency. Like if I do something once, as I'm doing it, I'm thinking about, well, how can I automate this the second time that I do it? And it's not always possible, but it's possible a lot of the time. And that's what I try to do.
Everyone's heard of ChatGPT, of course. I wonder, is there one tool that you would recommend other leaders or communicators, maybe look at or,
Yeah, sure. Yeah. One of the tools I think that's pretty good for marketers is called Jasper. So it's a writing tool. I think it has some image capabilities, but not, it's not as strong there. But yeah, Jasper's pretty good. It does a pretty diverse range of content creation. It'll do like long form blogs and emails and whole campaigns and stuff. So I use that. Again, it's always, as with any of these things, it's like 80% there maybe when it's done, sometimes a little bit less, but it's like 80% there is amazing, and
right. Yeah.
It, with anything, it's like, it depends on the prompt, right? So if I give it very specific instructions, I get some pretty good results. And then again, 20-25% effort to clean it up and make it feel like mine and all that stuff gets a long way. Yeah, I mean, I also have some other, like I have a local copy of Llama 2 running and I have a little terminal up. It's like kind of my coworker almost. So it's just like always there. I'll like ask it questions and see what it says back or whatever. So, that's more, I'm experimenting with like training it and stuff like that, but that's more like a side project, I guess.
The introvert's friend, you could call it.
Right. Exactly.
Your permanent Llama terminal up. I wanted to ask you, I think a lot of leaders can sort of get overwhelmed by like FOMO, or they look around and, oh my gosh, this person has a podcast. This person just wrote another book. This person has a huge LinkedIn following, or they're on TV interviews or whatever, right? And I mean, the list goes on. I mean, you can never do everything, and you have to figure out what to focus on. But part of that's to figure out what to stop doing. And you mentioned earlier, starting a podcast and stopping that podcast. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit more about kind of knowing where to focus and, maybe also knowing, realizing where you've made progress by stopping and experimenting.
Yeah. I mean, I wish there was an easier formula to know exactly when to stop, but a lot of it's kind of a gut reaction. But as a marketer, I look at the numbers too. So I get pretty obsessed with metrics and stuff particularly when I'm starting something and when it's at critical points. So I think I just don't think there needs to be a lot of shame in stopping something. I think the world is pretty, like, if your intentions are good and you're not like doing something at the expense of other people, I'll give the moral caveat there, but it's like, I think the world is pretty forgiving of people that try something and it doesn't work and they move on. And I mean, I look at other people that, you end up remembering the things that, unless it's like notoriously bad, like you end up remembering the things that people are successful at and the things that they talk about. And again, there's plenty of things that I've stopped doing. I mentioned the podcast. There's probably some other things I could mention, but I'd like to think that people are happy when my podcast gets better guests on it because it's better content. It's not just about me, it's about the guests that I'm able to get because it's more popular and because those guests are from well-known brands and have amazing experience, better experience than I do. Not only am I learning, but I hope that my listeners are learning. And so, it's a win-win, it's at no one's expense, and I think that's the critical thing. And so, when I see something where I'm not getting a return out of it, whether it's financial or just I like doing it or, some other kind of thing. And also I don't perceive that anyone else is getting a return out of it. like, why, keep putting good money after bad, so to speak, even if it's not financial. I think so many people kind of fall into that sunk cost fallacy, that bias that I learned the hard way. I'll say, with one of the startups that I was part of, that it's just better to walk away when you can, and take care of the people that have taken care of you, but like, walk away, when you need to. And again, I think people are willing to overlook those kinds of things, and willing to look at the successes.
I want to ask you, and you're going to know why I'm asking you this question, but how do you feel about your first book now that you've written so many when you look back at it?
Yeah, I mean, I pulled it from Amazon, and I have some copies. Someone could probably twist my arm and like look at it or whatever if they really wanted to. I don't recommend it, but it was the first time I wrote a book. I didn't know how to write a book. Like, I didn't take a class to write a book. I didn't pay money to a coach to help me write a book, or whatever. No, nothing against anyone that has done that, but like, I always just learned by doing. And so my first book, like, I'll say it was okay. It was a nice pamphlet. We'll put it that way. It was, short. It was, at this point, it was about web design, and I wrote it in 2016, so very out of date as of this year anyway. But it taught me something. It taught me a little bit more how to write a book. The second one I did, I learned a bit more, and now I'm 21 in. Now I feel like I know how to write a book, but I've always independently published my books as well. And so, as of this year, I'm actually working with a publisher for the first time on some books, and they're teaching me how to actually write a book. I wrote 21 books thinking I was getting better and like, I got this. And now, like, I'm working with a publisher, and they're like, well, no, you need to do it this way, not that way. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. So like, it's not, I'm not embarrassed of that. Like, I'm not putting that book out on for everyone to read, that very first one, but it's a learning. Like, I'm proud that I know so much more. And I'm honored that someone looked at my current books, even though they know more about publishing than I probably ever will, and said, you know what, we want Greg to write another book for us, and we're going to distribute it globally and translate and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's an honor to be able to do that, and to have come so far to be able to do that. So yeah, it's it's, as they say, it's a journey, right?
Yeah. And I mean, we had talked about that before, and that's why I wanted to bring it up. But I think it's really powerful to hear somebody who's written 21 books who goes, gosh, I look back at the first one and whoa, I've learned so much since then, right? I mean, what
Right.
like a great frame to say, look how far I've come. And now I'm at this new inflection point where I'm going to be working with a publisher, kind of a new era of how you're doing it. And I still have so much more. So hopefully you'll, look back at book 21 and go, oh my gosh, I'm so much better than I was then. And that's not a bad thing. That's like a really good thing. And, whether somebody's thinking, oh, maybe I should create a LinkedIn account because I'm a CEO. People keep telling me, but I just have never really posted. And yeah, whatever your first post is, you're probably going to look back in a year and go, oh, that's not that great compared to what I'm doing now. But that's a good thing, because that means
Right.
it's the first step that paves the way for a lot of progress. And I just really appreciated when you and I talked about that before, and you sharing it today, because, a lot of folks aren't necessarily willing to go there and say that. And, but it's much more inspirational, I think, for others to hear that. And it also just shows, like, you are, I mean, like we said, of one of the three things you should know about, you're a lifelong learner. Now you're in this doctoral program and you're learning all this stuff. And, I think that's one of the things that is essential if you want to continue to expand your influence in a fast changing world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm getting the doctorate because I know that one of my weak points is research. And I've done second party research for all my books, but I've never done first party research for any of them. And so, you know what? That would make my 22nd book a lot better, is to actually do, first party research, and to have a rigor to the process, and things like that. And so, you know what? I'm doing it. We'll see how it goes. I mean, I literally just started this month, so it's 2 years from now, I may come back on your show and be like, oh yeah, I dropped that. But I'm hoping I'll stick with it, and you can call me doctor next time we come on.
I was going to say, you'll be Dr. Kihlström when you
right.
Back. So just to wrap up, I wanted to just ask you, I know a lot of leaders find inspiration outside of their just sort of normal sphere that they're in every day. And I wondered if you could just share any place that you've found inspiration for the work that you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I intentionally try to expose myself to things that have nothing to do with marketing or technology, or even things that I'm not immediately like drawn to from an interest perspective. So, I mean, everything from, I've read books on math that I probably understood about like 10% of, because I'm just not a mathematician. I, watched science documentaries, history documentaries, all those kinds of things, just to like expand. There is something to be learned from just about, and if something is quality content, or if there was good intent put into something, there's something to be learned from it. And I try to embrace that, and I try to push myself, and not just into things that I know I'm going to agree with or that I know I'm going to like, but actually intentionally things that I know I may not agree with, or that I wouldn't necessarily pick up off the shelf if it was sitting there. But you know what? Because I'm not drawn to that, there must be, it's like the uncomfortable thing almost. It's like,
I was going to say, that kind of pulls us back to our quote about
yeah. So there's a lot of stuff, and there's so much out there. There's so much out there I'll never learn, but I'm going to keep trying.
I love it. Greg, for folks who want to learn more about you, just tell us, like, website, social media, where should they go?
Yeah, sure. So 2 things. LinkedIn, I'm super active on. So just search for Greg Kihlström on LinkedIn. And then my website is just gregkihlstrom.com. You can also get to it from the Agile Brand. It's probably a little easier to spell than my last name. So theagilebrand.com. So yeah, would love to hear from everybody.
And check out the new book that Greg has out, which is awesome. I got an advanced copy, Priority is Action, guide to help people make better decisions and follow through on them, as well as the podcast and some other great books, 21 of them, and more on the way. Greg, really appreciate you spending time with us today. And I really will take away, it's a good lesson. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Thank you for spending time with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. It was fun.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Chief Influencer, a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board. If you know a leader who should be featured as a Chief Influencer, please nominate them at chiefinfluencer.org. For show notes and more, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn. Until next time.